Yeah, that's 1 o'clock.
Yeah, here we go. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're having a blessed Friday. My name is Reverend Bryson White, and I'm the Regional Faith Coordinator for Faith in the Valley. Faith in the Valley and our community partners, we believe in a different, better future, that a different and better future is possible for the Central Valley if we work together. A future in which everyone is included, treated as sacred, has a chance to thrive and live healthy and lead a decent life. A future in which no one is seen as less than our life and living our lives in fear because of the color of our skin, our legal status, or the amount of money that we earn. A future where everyone has access to good jobs, clean air, clean water, alternatives to incarceration, quality health care, and safe neighborhoods. This Faith in the Valley Justice interview series is a set of conversations that highlight the role of faith and justice organizing in the Central Valley. We have discussed the role of interpretations of Scripture and its role in doing justice, the intersection between religion and mass incarceration, Christian perspectives on abolitionism, and conceptions of nonviolence, amongst other topics. Today, we're honored to have a discussion with Reverend Dr. Karen Crozier about her faith journey and as it connects to the intersection of her public ministry and academic work. If I can read just a brief bio on Dr. Crozier, and then we're going to get into the conversation. Dr. Crozier is the proud daughter of Catherine and David Crozier and a sister of five siblings, two sisters and three brothers. As a committed Christian academic, activist, and minister for social change, healing, and hope, Reverend Dr. Crozier brings a dynamic, energetic voice to her work and leadership. She is a native and current resident of Fresno, California, with over 20 years of service in both education and church ministry, and nearly 10 years of service in grassroots activism, advocacy, and organizing. She has ordination credentials from three denominations: Church of God of Anderson, Indianapolis, National Baptist Convention, and the Apostolic Church. And her multi denominational and ecumenical breadth enables her to engage across various denominational and religious lines. Her current community leadership efforts include Black reparations, African American infant mortality, and educational equity and justice. Dr. Crozier received her BA in psychology from UCLA in 1991 and her MA in education, early childhood from California State University, Fresno in 1996, along with her multiple subjects, teachers, credential, and cross cultural language academic development credential in 1994 and 1999, respectively. In 2005, she received her MA in religious education and her PhD in theology and personality or practical theology in 2006 from Claremont School of Theology. And lastly, in June of 2008, Dr. Crozier became the founder of Jewel of Justice, a consultant, training, coaching, spiritual direction, and pastoral counseling small business with focuses on women's personal and professional development. Uh, Welcome, Dr. Crozier. And I know that was a long bio. You're very accomplished. And I didn't even get a chance to read all of your bio and all of your accomplishments. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Reverend White, and happy Women's History Month to you and all who are watching on this day. It's an honor to be here and to have this conversation with you. I appreciate the invitation.
Amen. Amen. So let's get to it. Let's start with a couple of questions. The first question that we have for you, Dr. Crozier, is did the place of your birth, Fresno, play a role in your faith formation?
Fresno, in its unique sense, it was more played the role more so with the family that I come from, my lineage. My grandmother was a praying woman, my mother's mother, who was Seventh-day Adventist. And she would pray for every night for her children, her children's children, that means me, her grandkids, as well as her great grands before she transitioned back in 1994, I believe. And it was Fresno was a place that I had family. I called home. I knew I was cared for by my family, and as well my uncle and aunt, Uncle Wallace, my mother's brother, and his wife, Aunt Donna. They took me and my youngest brother to church at Saints Rest, where I first accepted Christ at 12 years old, and had came from Second Baptist, where uh, Miss Nesbitt and Miss Reed were my Sunday school teachers. So Fresno, in the sense, it was family, it was community, it was connection to those who cared for me, and especially when I'm born and reared in 93706. Went to Kirk Elementary School, and in that space as well, the community was vibrant. And I felt like at that time I could do anything, but I always knew I was planning to leave Fresno because I wanted to go out and do different and better things. Although I never looked down or disparaged Fresno, but I knew I would come back. I wanted to give something back to Fresno. I didn't know what it was, but that was just part of what stayed with me. And I think it had a lot to do with the big part of the African American community and my family that really cared for me and nurtured me in the various feats, endeavors that I had pursued as a young girl.
That's awesome. So your upbringing is one marked by nourishment and connection and relationship.
Yes, for sure. Because I didn't even name I was an athlete too. So
You're
I
a
was,
right?
yeah. And I would always run with the brothers, and more so than I ran with the sisters as far as on the court. And I was known for beating many brothers on the court and in the way that I played. But once in high school, I went to San Joaquin Memorial High School, and at that time in the 1980s, Jackie White, who is from the West Side, was one of the lead models for us as African American young women going into college, getting an academic scholarship, athletic scholarship, as well as going on to play with the Harlem Globetrotters, one of the first women to play with the Harlem Globetrotters. So there was a new path that was being made, both academically, athletically, and family connections, that was positive for me, even though West Fresno, where I grew up, didn't have many opportunities as far as education for us, being that Carver had closed. Irwin had closed. We had no middle school when I was coming up. And so I had to be bused out of my neighborhood. And that was part of the tension that emerged for me beginning in fourth grade, when there was no gifted and talented education programs in West Fresno, and had to be bused to Walters, which is just north of Shaw on First Street, which was the only gifted and talented education program that existed in Fresno. And so those were some of the tensions that I recall. That nurturing connection was valuable for me in who I came to be in Fresno, as well as the educational opportunities limited in what it meant for someone with my academic commitments and aspirations, even as a young child.
Wow, yeah, thanks for sharing that. So your your story is family connectivity, and you also seem to have been exposed to forms of mentorship and other opportunities, and athletics. You know what I mean? Like the intersection, your life really touches a lot of beautiful components. Yeah, I mean, I'm younger than you, but I remember hearing your name. Folks said that some of my older folks said that you were a hooper. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's really cool. Let me ask you another question, Dr. Crozier. So you have your PhD in theology. What made you choose to do to pursue a PhD in theology?
It was a call of God that came, that I finally was able to accept after 10 years. I believe I was called to preach, to be a preacher of the gospel, when I was an undergrad at UCLA back in 1989. And I was in a Black Baptist church in South Central LA, in the hood. I went back to my roots. I used to be a part of, one thing about the Black church, which we will talk about hopefully later, is I was accepted Christ by your grandfather, Pastor Riggins. He would say, I would rather scare you into heaven than lullaby you into hell, right? Yeah, and it's like, so I was scared to go to hell. at 12 years old.
Yeah, me too.
And that was, but they also instilled the fact that when you go away, you find a church home, right? So the church home was significant in the ways that I was nurtured in African American Christianity, the Black church experience. And so when I went away to college, yeah, I was intentional about trying to find a church home. And I found one that was in South Central LA about 2 years, junior year, late sophomore year. And it was in that space, though, that I began to grow around my questions about the role of women in that sense that I was possibly called to preach the gospel, but I was in the space that didn't believe that women could be preachers or pastors or ordained ministers. And so I had to resist that. And I even interpreted it in a negative way, which was oppressive, that was from the devil trying to deter me from what God really wanted me to be. So I had to give myself over to something else, another call. So it wasn't until 10 years later, after I had spent time at my master's in education at Fresno State, had did my master's thesis on Ebonics, which was pre Oakland's Unified School District decision on looking at the legitimacy of Black language as an African phenomenon and not necessarily as an English oppressive phenomenon that is derivative, has African roots and not necessarily from the master's English. And so therefore, I was planning to go get my doctorate degree in applied linguistics as a next step. But I was also interested in having the opportunity to go to a seminary that was attend an institution, a doctoral program in education or applied linguistics that was connected to theological education, so I could just go for my own personal benefit. And it was as I was working through that, the Spirit came and it said, "Are you ready to preach my gospel?" And it's like, what? And so I finally could not run any longer from the call. And the space had finally opened up for me to say yes to what God was calling me to be and do as a ordained minister of the gospel. And as soon as I said yes to that, it became clear that the Spirit said, yes, I want you to go back to school for your doctorate in theology, divinity, or religion. And I had no background in religious studies, theological studies, academically, formally, even though I had been doing my own personal reading because I consider myself to be a post-civil rights child and had heard of the role that King and the Black church had played in the civil rights movement in the South. And it was my commitment and intention, like, how can we resurrect the church of the civil rights for our contemporary reality? And even as a second grade teacher, at that time, I was a member of Westside Church of God, where Pastor Binion is the senior pastor, and would have him come and we would pray over my classroom and pray for how God will be using me. And I even said to him, I think teachers should be ordained because we are on the front lines with our babies every day in dealing with the complexity of issues as well as their families, and can be that more critical bridge, even as an extension of the church in the spaces that God calls us to teach. So theology school, my PhD was continuing my call as God was equipping me for what was next as I finally was able to say yes to the ordained ministry and what that would mean for me as I had to leave education and applied linguistics and go to a whole new realm in academic discipline
Yeah,
in theology.
that's a rich response. Yeah, the part that really resonated with me around you teaching the second grade. My mom was a second grade teacher for many years at Kirk Elementary, and so when you say that teachers should be ordained because they're on the front lines, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And my time in seminary, I've often wondered why I went to Fuller, and I was like, well, how come there isn't like a teaching credential program here for folks to come through? Because to what you pointed out, so many of the things that teachers, particularly young teachers, are walking with young folks with and walking with them through. So that's really cool. What's the name of the church that you were attending while you were in Los Angeles, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, it was Christville Gospel Missionary Baptist Church.
Okay. Yeah, you stayed in the Missionary Baptist family, huh?
Yep, 124th and Main. Won't forget it. Right on the corner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, now that's awesome. So, kind of following up with the question around theology and faith formation, can you please share some of your experience in your PhD program regarding faith identity and formation?
Right. When I entered into theology school, I was operating under an unfortunate illusion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look, I ain't even got it out, and I'm laughing. And my illusion was, oh, they don't care about the whole person. They are going to take seriously not only my intellect, but my commitment to my understanding of my call. Because I was a teacher who was trained how to teach. And in early childhood education, we focused on what it meant to educate the whole child. Even though religion and theology and spirituality wasn't included, I brought that to bear because that's who I was as a person and how I sense my call in the world, that especially amongst African Americans and Black people of the diaspora in general, we bring a sense of the spirit to who we are and how we move in the world. And so therefore, that was automatically integrated for me. And so I assumed that I would be able to have this intentional, comprehensive, holistic care as a doctoral student, that I would be able to integrate meaningfully theory, research, and practice in ways that would not be bifurcated, that it would not be too heavy on merely the theoretical paradigm or just practice without understanding what's undergirding you, what's at your core that's grounding you as you move out in this particular practice, and then to understand the empirical evidence that will be able to support and help you to see differently, deeply, broadly in your epistemological understandings.
Right.
So that wasn't the case.
that didn't happen over there at Claremont.
Well, not in that way. That was the illusion. That was the unrealistic expectation. Remember, I had no background in religion or theological studies. And so what Claremont did offer, especially during the time that I entered in, I came in 2000. So this is the turn of the 21st century, the beginning. And Claremont is known as, and I had no idea who Claremont was, is known as the Harvard of the West Coast, and serious scholars there in which they pride themselves on their academic prowess. And it was small enough to where there was a transition to where Lilly was pushing seminaries and theological schools to think about, wow, what does it mean for vocation, right? Vocational discernment and identity. And so Lilly was pushing these institutions to think seriously about the whole person and call, which was consistent with my upbringing, being in the Black church, of the call. And there were new professors that came in who were mostly women and non-white women, who were able to see me and receive me out of the space that I was pursuing. And that was the beautiful part of my graduate doctoral experience at Claremont. Give a shout out to Elizabeth Conde Frazier.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, who was the New Yorican prof who we connected on so many ways beyond the intellect, within and beyond the intellect. I mean, our time in prayer, in prophecy, that took shape because that's what the Spirit was calling in me, and she was able to receive it. As well as Ellen Ott Marshall, who's now at Emory University and Candler School of Theology in Atlanta. She was a young ethicist professor at that time when she entered in, and I was also didn't want to do traditional quals where you put me in a room to answer questions that you dictating, and I got to figure out what's in your mind based upon how I read the material. I said, no, let's do it dialogical. Let's have conversations. And so she, as well as Carol Lakey Hess, was open to that. And so all of my quals was done in this rich dialogical conversation with each one of my committee members. And yeah, and it so did prepare me for the writing phase because I was already writing and engaging them. And yeah, I think I did my dissertation within one draft. Didn't even need much revisions for that process. And Carol Lakey Hess, who's of both Native American, Cherokee heritage, as well as Jewish Holocaust, and her strong commitment to feminist leanings and orientations, and the ways we would go back and forth on race and gender. And she would push me and bring so many different people to bear in our conversations and our lamentations. There's times where we would just have to be still in silence and cry. So my experience, as far as faith identity and formation, as I stated earlier, I was grateful to have what I say the Spirit orchestrated, that I could not have done that. And the people who were brought in at the time that they were brought in, and even Carol has stated she decided to accept the position at Claremont because of me. She was the second religious educator professor, which was my subdiscipline of area. Primary religious education was the primary thing under theology and personality, and pastoral care and counseling was the other one. Yeah.
Wow, that's a beautiful experience. I'm glad your committee was open to new sort of pedagogical tools and leanings for you to have that space to conversate through that. Because I had to lock myself in a room, and some of it I enjoyed and some of it was torture. It was kind of like
Right.
yeah, it was kind of stressful, but. Yeah, so that's really cool that you have that other space. So from Fresno to UCLA, back to Fresno and Fresno State, back to the greater LA area at Claremont, and then back to Fresno, right? Mm-hmm. So this question kind of, as you returned back to the Fresno with degrees and different sets of experiences, so what have been your experiences as a Black woman who is an ordained minister who holds a PhD in Fresno? And I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure. I think you're the only Black woman, Black person who holds a PhD in theology from Fresno, but I could be wrong. But specifically, how have you navigated your calling within a religious environment dominated by males who often do not see women as equals in ministry?
Yes. That's a great question. I think you may be right, but I consider might be the only one with a PhD in theology or religion in Fresno until Dr. Barbara Glass came with Ecclesia. You know who she is,
yeah, right.
But I mean, I think they are not accredited yet. But in that sense. Yes, as far as from a quote unquote accredited institution, and I say quote unquote accredited because that's another whole politics, right? Like I throw out, Claremont is the Harvard of the West, so what? That doesn't mean, what does it translate into for our liberation and empowerment and fulfilling of who we understand God to be in the person of Jesus on earth? So anyhow. So yes, being a Black woman with a PhD in theology and religious studies, coming back to Fresno, I came back to Fresno in 2008 and applied for a position at FPU, Fresno Pacific University, which was for the university pastor. And I was thrilled, wow, because of the way that they had written the position on paper. The position on paper was written to where this person would teach classes, this person would engage in the community with both congregations and nonprofits, and this person would be creative and innovative in serving on the provost cabinet and not student life. And I was like, oh my goodness.
That's a perfect fit.
Exactly. I was like, that fulfills my call.
Yeah.
This is going to be at home too. And I'm positioned for this. Wow, Lord, I'm on my way back. Because I thought I would never be back to Fresno after I came back the first time. Yeah, but I was being called back, lured back again. And within that context, in interviewing for that position at FPU, I began to understand the tensions even within the hiring institution, Mennonite Brethren. So, in the women in their local churches cannot be the sole or senior pastor, but within this academic setting, because it's not a church, oh, they could have a university pastor as a woman, is what a former president told me during the interview process, right? So,
why not just apply that to the other space too? But yeah.
yeah. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So they see the church as separate from the academy is separate from the church and not an extension of. And in my mind, the academy should be an extension of and not in isolation of. And mind you, I had attended the seminary, Mennonite Brethren Biblical Seminary, from 1999 to 2001, before I took off to Claremont, because when I was pursuing my call after I finally accepted yes and knew that God was calling me into theological education, nobody wanted to accept me where there was Black theology and womanist theology, because I was applying to like the University of Chicago. Yeah, and nobody wanted me because I had no background in religion or theology, but I had to take a transitional space and just go local, go at home, and that's when I applied to MBBS for a certificate in Christian studies, or diploma in Christian studies. It was just a 30-unit program, I believe. 15 or 30-unit program, I can't remember. But in that space, one of the things that emerged for me from MBBS, the Mennonite orientation, is the kingdom of God concept that became more concrete and tangible and real, in the sense that within the Black church, we always say abstractly, I want to advance the kingdom of God, right? And so I want to do what is necessary for God's kingdom to come on earth. But what does that mean concretely? And how are we a manifestation of that collectively? And it was in the MBBS context, now Fresno Pacific Biblical Seminary, that I became, wow, they see their congregation, their as a local manifestation of God's kingdom, because they are living out ethically the standard that Jesus exemplified while he was here on earth. So I was thinking, wow, this could be a continuity of what this means for the academic institution. Not. So
Yeah.
That was the first, like, oh, wow. And then the president also indicated, well, if we wasn't interested in the woman, we wouldn't have got you this far, right? So it was on their minds, and he named it in that way. And I heard that I didn't get offered the university pastorate position because I was too academic, too intellectual for the students. And I was too much like the faculty. but yet there was no faculty position for me to. But the position, the university pastor had a faculty position, faculty role. So I thought, wow, this would be a beautiful mesh. So I realized then as well, FPU at that time, they had a men's camp when I was being interviewed and engaging the students. And I raised the question, is there a women's camp? How are y'all taking care of the young women in their faith identity information? And it had not been until I raised the question in my interview process. So uh, yes, gender politics in our more evangelical oriented religious Christian congregations, especially in the Central Valley, are huge in the ways that women are deemed as less than men is huge and have a particular role that only men can prescribe to what constitutes that role is big. And although I did not get offered the position as university pastor at FPU, I was they created a position, possibly because the provost at the time was a Black woman, Dr. Herman Williams, who was from the East Coast, was able to engage pastoral leaders who had more of a sensitivity and appreciation for what I had to offer. And so we were able to create a position for me to come back home at FPU at that time. And so, in short, um, I have just been true to who I know God has called me to be in the world while being mindful of the various social, political, racial, and gender politics that get played out, as well as socioeconomic. Because yes, I'm more educated, but I'm older now. But back then, I was much younger and under 40, and therefore that was problematic as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's. I mean, yeah. There's. Yeah, thank you for sharing that and some of the personal components to that. I mean, you're familiar with the church in which I was raised in. I was raised in Saints Rest with my grandfather, and my grandfather didn't believe in women ministers.
Mhm.
My other grandfather, Bishop Thomas Butler, out on North Avenue at Deliverance Temple, he did. So it was an interesting kind of dynamic growing up. But the older I got, I spent more time at Saints Rest, and even when I was on staff there in Fresno, some of it was beginning to break a little bit, but not in any way sort of fully in the way of the full acceptance of the gifts of women. But coming back to Fresno and seeing women having to preach on the floor and not being able to preach in the pulpit was a real it was just a contradiction to where I was in my own sort of personal faith journey, and then even the congregations that I was a part of in the Los Angeles area. And so that those pieces are really disturbing, and I've seen the effects on the lives of women that I love and seen their ministerial careers squashed. Who had great gifts to offer the church, and then I still have my own continued process and work of undoing those lessons that were taught to me. And so one of the commitments, not to kind of hijack the conversation, one of the commitments that me and Jen have made around Kairos is that we wouldn't have him reared in a congregation that doesn't believe in the full capacity of women and queer folk to operate in any aspect of ministry in which they're called to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the world that we want to sort of continue to rehash. But thank you for sharing that. I know there's much more that you can share around that also. We are at about 1:34, so let me ask you this this question, Pastor Crozier. How has your faith informed your public ministry? Right. So we've heard we've heard your academic journey, some of your faith formation journey, but how has your faith informed your public ministry in Fresno?
Right. It has been central as the core. As I stated earlier, I used to frame it around I want to resurrect the post-civil rights church for our today. Because the way that documentaries on King and Black history that I was exposed to, I wanted faith to be real um, in the public space. I wanted to live with integrity in the public space on who I was as a Christian, as one of African descent in the U.S., as a person who loved Jesus in the ways that that Jesus was presented, experienced, encountered within my particular religious experience, and to know that that Jesus was still present to engage around the social and political realities of not only me individually, but all of humanity. And I say that because I also grew up during the time of Fresno around Promise Keepers and urban ministry as it was taking shape here. And I used to question why are black men going to white men to tell y'all how they love y'all black wives? Uh, no! And why are y'all feeling the need to switch pulpits without us knowing when you just giving them more power to tell us what we already believe and we're not even critiquing it? And so, yeah, and as I stated earlier, teachers are on the front line. We need to be ordained and to think critically about how do we understand our call in that space that God has called us to occupy. So it has always been with me. And I think that my mother is a great role model in the way that she advocated, even though she didn't come from a particular explicit faith orientation identity. She is a believer. And though it was more so out of her love ethic for what was right and just, she was part of the making of the Concerned Citizens for Quality Education with Miss Curry,
Oh, wow.
and my mother was part of that beginning in advocating for getting Irwin reopened or given us something in West Fresno that is comparable so that our children can stay here. And so my mother has always been on the front line. She has never lived outside of West Fresno herself. Uh, and the ways that she continues to love me and my siblings, her grandkids, her great grandkids, it's just a beauty to behold. So for me, I have seen the work that it takes. I believe in a God who is not private only, but private and public. And so those particular orientations, understandings, commitments, and models have continued to shape me and what it means to move beyond the confinements of the institutional local church, local and denominational church. Because how do we touch and breathe and connect with all of life? That God, we say God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, but we don't have a local nor global awareness of how to really enter into that. So the public has always been, for the most part, a big part of how I understood my faith.
That's a deep answer, and that really connects a lot of dots for me, Dr. Crozier, in terms of even the work that you were doing around highlighting shortcomings of Gaston's hiring process. That connection of Gaston is
Mhm.
lineage work for you,
Mhm.
so that really kind of brings some things full circle and really illuminates a lot. So I appreciate you sharing that. I did not know that your mother worked with Miss Curry on the issue around urban or getting a comparable middle school back in Southwest Fresno. Yeah. So we're at 140. So let me we can not really transition. Kind of this is an extension of the previous question. So you have a new book, a great book that has just dropped. I just had it. I think I moved to the other side of the bed. I was going to
This
show.
one, this one.
Yeah, there you go. I was going to show you. I was going to show it for folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Yeah, I just kind of moved it out the way. I was just peeking through it, and so you wrote on Fannie Lou on Fannie Lou Hamer. When did you discover Fannie Lou Hamer, and what compelled you to write this much needed theological treatment of her?
Yeah, Fannie Lou Hamer was one that I had knew vaguely as, the woman from Mississippi who said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And I, as my work with King was developing, I wanted to bring in other voices beyond the Black male clergy, the Black male middle class clergy, and wanted to make sure that women's voices was also included in how we think about and celebrate the legitimacy of the effort that King had helped to organize and mobilize. And so Fannie Lou Hamer emerged when I came back home in 2008 and was invited to co-teach a leadership honors class with the provost, Dr. Herman Williams at FPU. And I said, well, let me see what's literature out there. And I came across a text called Servants of the People by Leah Williams, which identifies Fannie Lou Hamer among Septima Clark, Ella Baker, and other Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall. So basically what Williams was doing was looking at the ways that their servant leadership was able to empower the people as African Americans in the 1960s. And it was in her chapter on Hamer that I began to see that Fannie Lou Hamer was more than just a voting rights and registration activist. She was also engaged in land access and use, Freedom Farms Cooperative. She also was engaged in electoral politics. She not only was trying to get people to register to vote, she also ran for office. And the first time that she voted, she was able to vote for herself. Now, how powerful is that?
Wow. Wow.
What she went through just to get registered to vote, because she got evicted from the plantation when she failed the first time when she tried to register to vote. She got evicted, was almost killed because they came after the Night Riders tried to kill her at the house that she had to go to. And she was criminalized for trying to exercise her constitutional right to vote, that she didn't know she had a constitutional right to vote until she was 44 years old in 1962. I also discovered that Fannie Lou Hamer worked with Dorothy Height in the National Council of Negro Women. She worked with women, white women and Black women, professionals in social work and counseling called Wednesdays in Mississippi, in helping to provide clandestine operations in the ways that women from the North was able to get access to go back and learn of the experience from women of the South, and then go back north to get the resources that was necessary to bring the change that was needed back in the South of Mississippi. She was engaged in Head Start education, Child Development Group of Mississippi, which is, her Head Start is still in existence to this day. She was also involved in Black women's reproductive and infant health injustice, because she was a victim of forced sterilization. She went in for a benign tumor on her stomach and ended up having her uterus removed. And therefore, that was highly problematic and pervasive. And in light of the reality of that Black people, she understood that Mississippi wanted Black people to be displaced or extinguished. They wanted them out of there. Don't stay here because you're not welcome. And she understood the federal government considered Black people a surplus. And so she was constantly navigating so much more than just trying to have the right to vote on so many different levels. And I said, wow. And then what really got it for me is that she was a Christian, and she articulated that in a public way, because she said, I don't mind my light shining for freedom, because Christ came and lived and died to set us free. So she had an understanding of Jesus in the 1960s that it took to the late 1960s and 1970s before Black liberation theologians and Latin American liberation theologians. She said Jesus was a revolutionary person out there with the people where it was happening. And they didn't say that Jesus was a liberator on the side of the oppressed to the late 1960s, early 1970s. So she,
wow.
Yeah, she said this in the early 1960s.
Wow. I didn't know
that Jesus was a revolutionary person out there with the people where it was happening. And that's what God is all about. And that's where I get my strength, end quote. Wow. So she knew she was empowered by something that was both transcendent and immanent. And when I began to read her speeches and listen to her speeches, I go, everyone is only talking about her voting rights and registration activism, but she was a thinker. And she also was much more broader, multidimensional beyond the voting rights and registration. And so how do we bring this together from a theological and religious lens to amplify her voice in a whole new academic discipline, but yet still see the relevance and the influence she had in those other areas as well? So that's how.
Wow. Yeah, that's Dang, I didn't know that she was framing her work as revolutionary theology prior to the advent of liberation theology. And could you even help us a little bit with the distinction between the two? Because I was reading the introduction of your work. You make a clean distinction between why you named it her revolutionary praxis versus her liberatory praxis.
Right. She does not use the term liberation in the sense that many of our Latin American theologians and Black theologians operate from, is looking at it particularly from the particular lens of we need to be liberated from this particular social political system. She, as I understand her, was operating more from the person and work of Christ in the way that she had experienced and encountered him in relationship to the reality of Black people. Yeah, we ain't living free, right? If Christ died to set us free and this Jim Crow South is a closed society, how do we rethink the way either our faith is inconsistent with our lived experience, or how our lived experience must become in alignment with what this freedom? So she would invite the people, hey, we need to pick up our cross like Jesus. Because freedom was his main commitment message. And that was what motivated her at her core. And so liberation, as I don't go into much detail, I don't know what you're particularly referring to. You can elaborate if you want to. But it becomes mostly grounded in a social, political, existential reality. And I think she was doing both a moral vision of the significance of Jesus, because I consider her utilizing her Christian faith in a way that she was not necessarily trying to Christianize people who were not Christian. She was just trying to radicalize the liberals. She was trying to Christianize Black folks who confess to be Christians. Hey, y'all got to go to another whole level of what it means to be a disciple of Christ.
Wow. So does her concept of revolution, am I hearing correctly that it's also sort of rooted in a deep and robust understanding of the full transformation of society, and not just kind of like the elevation of particular groups to have greater access to a system that is exclusionary and death dealing?
Beautiful. She was saying this way. Yes, the way you broke that down, she was saying this way, that because she would always get calls about people telling her to go back to Africa. And she told them, when you give the Indians back their land, You send the Chinese back to China, the Koreans back to Korea, and then you get back on the Mayflower you came from. And she says, no, we are all in this together. We here now. So we got to coexist, cohabitate to open up a new society and not try to look at, oh, just what I can get. She knew that white people, she also said white people hated her, poor white people. She understood the class dynamics with white people being poor, white rural people being pawns too of the system. But she knew that I can't hate you because you hate me. And she even engaged in her Freedom Farms cooperative in providing housing and food for certain poor white families because she knew the havoc that it had wreaked on poor black rural folks. So she could not dismiss or disentangle herself from the plight of the poor white rural folks as well in Mississippi. So yes, it wasn't grounded in particular identity politics based upon race or class. It was like a much bigger, transcendent, open reality of who are we as human beings and who do we say we are as Christians in living out this fulfillment around what y'all call democracy, because she said, no, it's for a handful, by a handful, and with a handful. She knew that. And before she died, she changed her political party from Democrat to Independent. So she knew that both of them was playing us.
Wow. When did Fannie Lou Hamer pass away?
Not too long ago. Well, 1977. She was born October 6, 1917, and passed March 14th, 1977.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that breakdown. I'm looking forward to digging into your work. For those who are listening or those who will listen as this video is uploaded onto different platforms, Dr. Crozier is leading a training for Faith in the Valley this coming Tuesday and then March 31st out of her work with Fannie Lou Hamer on reparations and helping us think through what it means to embody the ethic of reparations and to do larger sort of system transforming work. So we're looking forward to hearing even a deeper dive into the life of Fannie Lou Hamer as offered to us through Dr. Crozier's interpretation. And then we only have a little bit of time left. I have a bunch more questions I would like to ask, so we can chop it up offline. But the last question for Dr. Crozier is, where do you see God showing up in Fresno? Where do you see God showing up in Fresno?
I don't want to just give a flippant response, and thank you for the question. I think I must begin with the confession. From my particular perspective and location, in general, Fresno is a hard place to be. Wow. Hard because of we are people, black, white, we are most diverse people, but there is such a stronghold on the minds in this space that has us in deep bondage to the things that's contrary to what God has for us. And I have been called to Fresno. The people in the place, in the space continues to call out to me that I have cried with, for, and because of. And so where do I see God showing up in Fresno? I don't think I'm clear at this time. Yeah, to be honest. Because even though there are various projects that are quote unquote good, it's still within the same type of consciousness.
Mm.
And how do we say that that's really God? In our white evangelical context, we always say, this is God showing up. Is this really God showing up?
Mhm.
I don't know. So I think your question pushed me to just be present to be honest. I'm not quite sure where God is showing up in Fresno. Uh, Yet I am one who is not without hope that
Mhm.
God is present in Fresno.
Wow. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that's something to sit with.
Yeah, what does it say to you?
Yeah, man, there's a lot there. When you first said that Fresno's a hard place, that really resonated with me for a lot of different reasons. But um, the main reason, and I love Fresno. We can have a dialogue around my connections around family and friends.
Mhm.
I love Fresno. I rep Fresno wherever I go. Always will. No matter where I am
Right.
in the world. Um, when I was 20 and I was on my way to Cal State Northridge, and I was deciding, whether to go to Cal State Northridge or um, San Francisco State, my dad told me, he said, son, he was like, leave Fresno and never come back. He was like, Fresno's no longer a place for black folks. That's what he told me. you know, and he wasn't saying that in any way around like a disdain for the city. He was, concerned about my well-being in the city in terms of what the city offers and provides around opportunity and the way so many of us are living, with our lives. As Howard Thurman said, with our backs up against the wall, the economic precarity, the early death that has marked my own family. We buried so many folks, who have died before the age of 60, before the age of 40, from, due to, you know, um, the environmental racism that leads to early death.
Mhm.
And so he told me to leave and to never come back. And my dad was a person who served the city. My mother served the city. My grandpa served in the church and served the city in different ways. So now, as the deep love that I have for my city, and now that I have a son, I want my son in a place where he can flourish. And I just kind of wrestle with some of the changes that have happened in Fresno, to where I'm not sure that there are really robust black spaces um, for him to see just a beautiful tapestry across the various ways in which kind of blackness is embodied.
Mhm.
That really doesn't exist in the city. It's very, like you said, it's very dominated by a white evangelical culture that really marks our black faith spaces also, and marks even outside of those spaces. So that's what kind of has the tension for me and my family around whether we could call Fresno home for a long term.
Mhm.
We're in Los Angeles right now. My wife's in grad school at UCLA, so this is where we are now. And to be able to go into South LA, to go into Lambert Park,
Right.
go down in the Watts. I mean, those things they mean a lot. When we're
Mhm.
in Chicago, to go into the Hyde Park on the South Side, on the West Side, and see black artistic expressions, black musical expressions, different types of black faith expression, not even just black Christian, black Jewish, black Muslim. It just kind of brings about a different kind of experience and confidence. you know,
Right.
and so that's a part of like my wrestling with the city, amongst some other things. I have hope that God has raised up many folks in Fresno. I just pray that the Spirit continues to pour and reveal itself and to fall afresh on folks. Um, for us to think differently about how things are arranged and structured in that
Mhm.
city, and for those who identify as Black, who can we can have a greater confidence in our own traditions and our own histories, and not feel like we have to get approval from white audiences.
Ashe.
So yeah, it's 2:00, and there's there's so much more to talk about. Dr. Crozier, thank you so much for joining us. For those who are listening, I'm going to share this on my Facebook page, and this will be uploaded to the Faith in the Valley webpage to be housed there for your for your viewing pleasure. Dr. Crozier, you can show your book again one more time.
Yes.
For folks, and we will. If you are interested in the book, leave that in the chat, and then we'll follow up with you if you're interested in ordering and purchasing this this much needed book from Reverend Dr.
Yeah, you can order it Amazon.com for $65. But if you want an autographed copy, you can email me at Karen@JewelofJustice.com, and that will be for $55.
Yeah.
So, and I can get that information to you, Karen@JewelofJustice.com.
Yeah. And Dr. Crozier didn't set the Amazon price, so don't be mad at her for it costing $65. She just set the publisher price. So thank you again, Dr. Crozier, and we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday and learning from you some more.
Great. Thank you, Reverend White. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Peace.